Welcome back. Today's topic is still death, but this time we will extend it to a question that many may be curious of. A question that is implied in the words. That is, why do we feel sad when we see beautiful things? Some people think that if we think it about rationality, it must be confusing or even incomprehensible. Beauty and sadness are equated here. Why does life, with its wild and unpredictable nature, leap before our eyes, while those who have experienced the world thoroughly may find such questions meaningless? They might view such reflections as merely another manifestation of artsy-fartsy. However, I find this topic deeply intriguing, especially when I notice that the beauty many viewers envision in their message is almost always reflected through emerging technology and cultural products. Upon discovering this phenomenon, my interest grew even more. At the same time, I believe that this pathway revealed a somewhat harsh interpretation. Naturally, that truth is closely connected to our main topic today, death. In the 21st century, there's a similar argument in humanities that modern thought is increasingly being controlled by science and technology. Starting with Rousseau, Derrida, Foucault, Lacan, and including Stigler, whom we discussed in a previous episode, almost all of them have expressed such concerns in their theories and used this as a starting point to critique capitalism. The reason I mention this is because it is closely connected to our topic theme of death and its implications. The question we raised at the beginning is closely related to this. First, we must clarify an interesting concept called the story domain. Philosopher Stigler argues that humans have a tendency to summarize and characterize their life experiences, and these clearly organized life experiences are further compiled into a story or a legend. When humans become immersed in such narratives, their behavior is referred to as the story desire. Stigler asserts that historical narratives in human archives, which moved pieces, changed the development of human history, are an excellent manifestation of this story desire. Cultural traditions are also sustained by the existence of this story desire. Yeah, in fact, you can see that Foucault also expressed a similar idea, though he integrated Stigler's concepts of story desire into his deconstruction of the gaze. Compared to Stigler's more moderate approach, Foucault's gaze is clearly provocative. In summary, the desire for stories has been mentioned by many modern and contemporary philosophers, though the terminology varies. In other words, many modern and contemporary philosophers have nearly unanimously agreed that stories play a crucial role in the sequence of human existence and development. It is both an expectation, the expectation of what one might play in a story, which is a philosophical pre-existence, and a fact, as the culture practices one inherits lead what one desires to play and ultimately what one does play. This is the philosophical second dimension. It is also a cause and effect relationship, as it indirectly determines the trajectory of our future. Even if the future has not yet arrived, it is a philosophical third dimension, a state of constant death and rebirth. In summary, philosophers believe that humans are deeply influenced and controlled by this consciousness. This was true in the past and remains true today. As time moved into the 21st century, the theory of our desires for stories became more subtle. The subtlety does not lie in time providing its error, but in time proving its correctness. After technological innovation enabled culture to be produced through industrial training, the desire for stories was given a new interpretation, a new revolution. That is, culture was presented as a fictional narrative that emerged from human nature, guiding people toward the desire for stories. This desire then drives a series of consumption behaviors, In other words, the essence of capital's industrialization of culture is to relentless concretize stories and connect them to the desire for industrial production and consumption. Stiegler put it this way: world trade has developed through the use of various persuasive techniques, and all persuasive techniques owe their existence to the art of storytelling. The use of audiovisual technology, resources, of media networks, and programming industrial systems that cultivated this astonishing passion. The Lean passion he refers to in his writings actually refers to the industrialized stories and images that have been artificially produced and crafted. For example, television dramas are one such example. In fact, people's demand for stories is not difficult to understand. Stigler put it, "Do people always want to play a role, but what role? To play the role of an existence they desire. Social reality does not grant anyone the possibility to play the role of an existence they desire. They can only compromise within it. Thus, driven by this inherent nature, capital begins to produce and sell various forms of existence, persuading us to embrace them. Unlike social reality, it does not emphasize the possibility or the consequences involved. Instead, it unabashedly offers a wide array of existences. Like the dishes on a banquet table, it offers everything imaginable. In this way, we discover that social reality is fragmented at this point. For example, as we discussed in the first talk on death, reason does not permit humans to place themselves on the brink of madness. At certain necessary moments when obvious contradictions arise, and these contradictions transcend the boundaries that reason can cover, reasons will compromise with madness. For instances, when people avoid the reality provided by society, they turn to a virtue existence created and controlled within the realm of artificial stories. Acknowledging the contradiction that such an existence actually holds something real, some real world significance. This contradiction and fragmentation have long been evident, but in today's increasingly developed internet age, this fragmentation has become an integral part of social reality. In short, the truth is virtue and virtue is real. What we see today is not the virtue entering reality, but reality moving toward the virtue. Nevertheless, we can still rely on rationality to explain our madness. For instances, the obsession with the virtual existence created and manipulated within the realm of stories is due to boredom. We need to find interesting things to do to drive away boredom. Yeah, in fact, the concept of boredom is also a subject of study for philosophers and scholars across various fields in humanities. Heidegger once explored boredom, saying that a profound boredom, like a silent presence permeating the abyss of being, plunges all things and the person coexisting with them into a peculiar state of indifference. This boredom reveals the entirety of existence. In other words, boredom reveals the existence of the self. The reason we pursue virtual existence within the realm of stories is precisely because we sense the self-existing brought about by boredom, which is steering within us. It urgently needs a mirror to see the true form of its own existence. This represents a form of alienation from social reality and also signifies another psychological state. In other words, we may formally perceive reality as virtual and virtuality as reality in our daily lives. Perhaps in the characters of a TV series or a video game, their experiences, the love they pursue, and the values they articulate through events are precisely our true existence. However, due to rules of social reality and the brilliance of reason, we are forced to alter the sequence of our own self-existence. presenting a fragmented, incomplete self and walking through what should be the real world as a virtual image, seeing the virtual world as not too real, and seeing the real world as not so virtual. Now, let us reflect on why contemplating beautiful things evokes sadness and doubt. Answer becomes evident. It is because, in the midst of boredom, we become aware of our own existence and unconsciously realize that we cannot exist in the real world as a complete entity. We can only appear in the world, meant to live in a fragmented and decreased state. At this moment, the dead are more complete, while the living are fragmented. At this moment, reality begins to feel false, while the false becomes the honest. It is worth noting that profit-seeking nature of capital is gradually pushing things to extremes. As a result, we often feel the collapse of our sense of self. For example, the phenomenon of TV dramas, as well as mobile games, that everyone on this platform is familiar with, are the most obvious examples. To discuss these examples, we must first set aside a presupposition. This is what many philosophers refer to as the single mechanism. We can loosely describe it as popular. Scholars argue that many cultural products produced by capital within the realm of storytelling share a common feature: a clinical single mechanism. This clinical single mechanism reduces or directly avoids individual rational participation and thought. On one hand, it facilitates the unfolding of a mirror that reflects one's self-existence. On the other hand, it opens the back door for the convenience of production. For instances, in some mobile games characterized as 2D, one can easily infer certain information simply by observing the character's appearances. That is, by passively receiving symbolized information, one can understand the content these products aim to represent, or even the objects they seek to metaphorically convey. Physical maturity, an alluring yet slightly husky voice, an arrogant attitude, a series of simple constructs can directly establish a dangerous image of a woman or man. And it is precisely because of the symbolic nature of these simple constructs, akin to traffic lights, that the mirror created by them becomes particularly fragile. Once a day, it derives from the traffic light, meaning we originally attributed to him. True, this is just a metaphor. Once a day, it deviates from the original structure. The mirror shatters. The self we see through him will also vanish. More accurately, it will be hidden by ourselves. At this point, I think everyone has realized that the self we're talking about, the self we unconsciously perceive in moments of boredom, is precisely the beauty we described. When we think that beauty has died, that it has been destroyed by human hands, that it has been trampled upon by mundane interests, we forget that true beauty is revealed in ourselves, because we are beauty itself. We seek a virtual existence to see the beauty that has long been entrenched within us, the beauty we desire, encounter, and hope for. At the same time, this reputation-based beauty is also dark, revealing the various desires of our self-existence, including the nightmares that humans are born with. However, we cannot loosely label that nightmare as an inherently bad protagonist. For example, cowardice we described in the first episode of Death is precisely because the cowardice shaped a young boy who did not understand the truth, yet still had the courage to face death, understand death, and accept death. We will discuss this dangerous nightmare in the next episode. Alright, that's all for today's episode. Thank you for listening and watching. See you next time.